My name is Ty Defoe of the Oneida and the Ojibwe tribal nations, coming to you live for the American Indian Community House. We have some very special people with us today, and I just wanted to give us a little background about what we are doing. This is the sacred space for knowledge keepers in storytelling. It's a time to listen and learn and laugh and love on one another, because our Native history has been erased for, 100 years, 500 years plus, and it's only told through a settler colonialist perspective. So in this sacred spaces, we wanted to explore and honor in the journeys of our elders, our story, and not a type of history that was placed on us. So we wanted to go back, to go forward in a good way with this good medicine, with your families and all of our nations. Today with us, this is extremely important because we have a special guest, Pete Hill, from our Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer community, which is a rare occasion, and it is with an honor and pleasure that we have our guest today. So I want to also introduce and welcome our co-host who is with us today, Ahimsa.
Sego, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be continuing the Sacred Space series with Pete Hill. I'm going to be reading Pete's bio. Pete Hill is Cayuga Nation Heron Clan and is currently the Special Initiatives Coordinator at Native American Community Services of Erie and Niagara Counties Incorporated, also known as NOCS, where he has worked for nearly 28 years in many different areas. Pete has always been a strong advocate for inclusion, diversity, and cultural competency, and has been recognized several times for his contributions to help the community to move beyond the impact of historical traumas and related factors that have negatively impacted the intergenerational health and vitality of all Native Americans and all our relations. We've been doing a wonderful set of Two-Spirit programming, starting off in Pride Month and continuing into an infinite Indigenous summer. We'll be continuing Two-Spirit programming through September and ongoing into the community house's future, as we've done in the past as well. And we've been doing that through some Two-Spirit bingo programming that many of you enjoyed on multiple Friday nights. And we're also going to be increasingly through the Sacred Spaces series, moving from now through September, bringing different Two-Spirit elders together through this elder honoring space. So we're excited to hear Pete talk today, to share knowledge, to share wisdom, and to share from his life story in ways that can be good medicine for all of us. So Pete, Sego, it's an honor to have us. Yawa.
Yahweh, Ahimsa and Ty and everybody with the American Indian Community House. It is a tremendous honor and very humbling for me to be invited and to share for this sacred space effort. And I really appreciate all the work that American Indian Community House has done over its 50 plus years of existence and serving the indigenous communities throughout the New York City areas, but all throughout Turtle Island. So I really am very honored and appreciative of this opportunity to share. Let me see if I can minimize the screen here. Yeah, I am a member of the Cayuga Nation and I belong to the Heron Clan. And I first wanted to say that I do work at Native American Community Services, but I'm not doing this tonight as a representative of NACS. I'm doing it on my own time, sort of. So it's like a personal journey I'll be sharing about. So it's no reflection or no representation of NACS specifically, although I will be talking a little bit about the work that I've been doing over the years. So to get us going, again, many nyawes to the American Indian Community House and all of you for being here today. What we're going to be talking about, I have a PowerPoint and one short video I was going to share. And what I'll be talking about isn't necessarily an agenda, but it's just different topics I'll be talking about. I will do a self-introduction about my journey being from Haudenosaunee community, specifically the Tuscarora Nation territory, but I grew up in Southern California and how that impacted me and how it impacted me when I came back to New York. My identity and growth really as a Two-Spirit person and some of the messages, mixed messages I received throughout my life that contributed to some of the experiences and difficulties that I've endured, some of the traditional teachings, many of the traditional teachings that help me sustain myself and continue the work that we're doing. We'll be talking a little bit about my involvement with the community house, New York City, and all our relations. And then I'll be including some discussions on the work of healing from historical traumas for all of our people. And then there'll be time for questions and dialogue, near the end. So that's what we'll be talking about. It's not going to be in order necessarily. I'll be jumping around with all these different topics. That's why it's not an agenda, but more of a topic kind of storytelling in the spirit of what this effort is all about. So to start out for Haudenosaunee, one things that we always generally do when we start an activity or it could be a community event, it could be a training or a meeting, kind of like or a gathering, it could be ceremony, it could be anytime people get together, is we're asked to be reminded and to acknowledge how much we have to be thankful for. And we often do our Thanksgiving address in native language. I'm still learning my language as best I can. So this slide, I wanted to share this slide that we did a while ago. And it shows the different sections of all the different parts of the Thanksgiving address. And just to give you a quick heads up, I've heard this Thanksgiving address go for 2.5 hours, sometimes a little bit longer, because when you really think about how much there is to be thankful for, there's a lot. So as you can see in this slide on my screen, it's upper left, where it says the people, that's the first one we give thanks for. So I give thanks for each and every one of you for being on this evening's call, for everybody with the community house, everybody who I've worked with. And when we give thanks to the people, there's so many things we could talk about. Just everybody who helped us all to get to this day, whether it's our parents, our siblings, our family members, our community members, whatever our relationships were with them, in some way they all helped us get to this day today. So we want to give thanks and honor all of those people who helped us along our paths. It's when we give thanks to the people, it's also recognizing that every day that we wake up is another gift that the Creator gives to all of us, to spend another day on this world, on this earth, with our friends, our loved ones, our colleagues, our clients, our partner, whoever, our family members, or children, or whoever gives us that love and support. That's also what we can give thanks for, is just being able to wake up in the morning is another gift that we all have. I've been taught many times that it's my duty, our duty as human beings, to respect every person who we meet, because two reasons. First, and this is one of my teachings from my grandmothers I got when I was a young guy, is to respect everybody first, because the Creator gave them life. And if we're going to disrespect somebody automatically or because of whatever, that's actually disrespecting what the Creator has done. And that's not my role as a human being. We're here to respect everybody, no matter what they're doing. Sometimes if they're hurting other people and themselves, maybe we need to keep them at an arm's distance, but it's still important that we respect them. I'll have a story that relates to that as we go forward. And the other thing that she taught me is that I can learn something from everybody I meet throughout my whole entire lifetime. Sometimes some really good lessons, sometimes some very difficult or hard lessons, and other lessons I can learn just by watching other people, whether or not I actually interact with them. So the first thing we give thanks for are all the people. And again, there's so many ways of giving thanks to the people, even the ability to speak and to listen and to see and to smell and to taste things. So many of our people and so many other people either don't have that ability or have lost that ability or those abilities for a number of different reasons. So it's like acknowledging all the things that often we might take for granted, and to acknowledge all of that. Oftentimes we think of people in our own personal and family and work lives who maybe they are going through some difficulty or some health challenges or doing things that aren't helping themselves. And sometimes that can weigh on our mind, and it prevents us from being grounded and focused on what we're talking about. So the way I've been told is that we send our love, greetings, and thanks to all those people, and hopefully the Creator takes care of them as best as possible. So the next time we get to see them and encounter with them again, they'll be as healthy and well as best as possible. A lot of folks nowadays in social services and human services are talking about mindfulness, to be present in the moment. This is what our Thanksgiving address, our Canonio, does. And if you could tell on the slide, I apologize for the small font of the font size, but after every section of the Thanksgiving address, or Canonio, it says, "And now our minds are one." And that's what it does. It brings us together to agree that yes, we can be thankful for the people and all that means, and everybody's of that same mind to give thanks for each other. After we give thanks to the people, we give thanks for our Mother Earth. And again, there are so many different teachings of our Mother Earth that I've been told. One of my favorite is that she holds up our feet all at the same level, which means that nobody walks a foot above or a foot below the ground. And the teaching there is that every person is part of our human family. Every person deserves that respect, that love, that kindness that we all benefit from. And that's one of the teachings from our Mother Earth. And there's so many more. We can get into all these different sections of this, but rather than talking more about the Thanksgiving address, I want to show this really a short video from the Scano Center out of Syracuse, New York. So let me change gears a little bit here. And I'll show this video from the Scano Center.
The Thanksgiving address is one of the most important parts of our culture that can be conveyed to the outside world. The Thanksgiving address is an address. It is not a prayer. We are actually, with our language, speaking to those parts of creation and thanking them, and then having the whole gathering send that thanksgiving out to those parts of creation.
It lays our relationship to the universe of how we're to behave and how to respect the universe we live in.
It's a directive. It's also a summation of our cosmology. It tells us in the beginning to be respectful and to be thankful. And that's where the idea of Thanksgiving comes.
The Thanksgiving address is such a beautiful oration. I think of it as just this river of words that takes us to an orientation of gratitude. It reminds us to acknowledge that we're not alone in the world, that our very lives are dependent upon the gifts of all of these other beings with whom we share the planet.
Any gathering we have, whether it's a large one or a small one, whether it's a meeting of the Council of Chiefs or whether it's ceremony or a clan meeting, the Thanksgiving address is put out before all.
One of the parts of it that I think is so powerful is that cadence that says, let us bring our minds together as one. I think we can think about the Thanksgiving address as an example of native science. In a way, it is a listing of all of the elements of the ecosystem.
Start with the Ganohanyo, we call the Thanksgiving address. The words before all else. You give thanks for the people around you, that we're all here and we're healthy, we're able to be here. And you give thanks for the Mother Earth, all the things that she provides for us. And then we go into the things that the Creator has set down here for us.
You're thankful for water, for the corn and all the vegetation, the trees, the sun, we call it our older brother, the moon.
To the animals running about, to the berries, to the birds, and kindly and respectfully we put our minds together as one and give a great gratitude.
So we talk about the soft winds that bring the seasons. We talk about the thundering beings. The thundering voices we call our grandfathers, and we call the winds our grandfathers. Personify them. Respect them. We love them.
And so we continue on in that model of Thanksgiving in our ceremonies throughout the year.
Well, the ceremonies are part of the acknowledgement. It all relates to the Thanksgiving address. It all relates to the work that the Creator has put in to Mother Earth.
Because we're dependent on everything. That's why we keep our ceremonies going, to say thank you for the gifts of life every day.
It takes you to that place of thanksgiving, and everyone has that place where you're feeling that feeling of being grateful for what you have.
It's a renewal, it's a continuation. Great authority, great instruction, good values.
I just really love that video because there's so much wisdom in that video. The part where Oren talks about that we love everything in the natural world is so important to recognize that everything in the natural world is our relatives, our relatives. And one of the things that I know, like in mainstream society, we think of if something's alive or not, scientifically or biologically alive, but like rocks and water and all these things that we use in our ceremonies, they have that life-supporting benefit and gift that they share with us. And we're so thankful for all of those elements of the natural world to carrying on their original instructions. So this video, I just love this video. Sometimes it brings a tear to my eye just because of how much there is to be grateful for. I just want to acknowledge the Scano Center out of Syracuse, New York for putting it together. It is available on YouTube. So the address for the YouTube video is there if you're ever interested to look at it again or to use it for other purposes and other sharing of our culture. To continue, I really wanted to, especially for tonight and all the things that we're doing with these webinars, is to honor a sacred and safe space. Because I think one of the things that, as Ty was talking about in the introduction, we've lost so much of our culture, and so many people are trying to keep it and maintain it and teach and restore it as to get back to a thriving culture. I just want to acknowledge this picture. When two of my colleagues at NACS and I were at the Shinnecock Nation Territory in May of 2018, we were greeted very warmly and welcomed into their community. And the person who met with us took us around their nation territory. And in the middle of their territory, they have this space here. And again, this is a sacred and safe space where in their nation and among some of their community members, they've seen issues like many of us do in many of our communities or Native communities, problems of alcohol abuse, domestic violence, substance abuse, and all kinds of things that many of us are way too familiar with. So what they did is that they created this circle space in the heart of their territory, and they do talking circles, they do healing efforts there. It's a place of ceremony. And when we were going through, I asked and I was given permission to take a picture of that. So I just want to honor our brothers and sisters from Shinnecock Nation and all our relations to help us move along the discussion we're going to have tonight. But just that importance of that all of us can embark on that healing journey, and we can use our voices. And I'll come back to those thoughts as well as we go forward. Nowadays, I do a lot of public speaking. I'm asked to do different webinars. I've spoken to a lot of different folks over my tenure at NACS and then throughout. And it used to be where I would get nervous or I wouldn't want to speak to a large group. And I realized, and this is a kind of like a strategy or a trick, not a trick necessarily, but a way that I can get out of my own nervousness. Because one of the reasons why I became so public and an advocate for the work and what I do now is to remember a lot of my friends who I lost in my lifetime. And this is a list. These are all Native people. And excuse me if I get a little emotional. But these are all Native people who were good friends of mine, who were lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, intersex, all the letters in the Two-Spirit. And all of them, pretty much nearly all of them, took their last breaths of life in not very good circumstances. They pass from suicide, from alcohol abuse, from domestic violence, AIDS complications, um, other forms of violence. And the reason why I can help get myself out of being nervous is that when I speak, it's not Pete Hill who's speaking necessarily. I mean, it is me, but I'm doing it in honor and remembrance of my friends. Because really, when I think about these folks, nobody really ever spoke on behalf of them. Many of them, if pretty much all of them, were excluded and kicked out of their own communities or talked down to or had to fight almost every day or every week to defend who they are because of who they are. Again, transgender, bisexual, intersex, lesbian, gay, two-spirit. So when I think of them, their strength comes to me and my nervousness kind of disappears. So in that same light, I realized many of us have lost folks. Either, we've lost a lot of people through COVID, and all kinds of things. So before we continue on, I'd like to take a brief moment of silence to remember all of our people, all of our relations who we've lost, and all of our ancestors who have brought us to this day. So if we could do a moment of silence, please. All right, Yahweh, for that. And again, it isn't to mourn people who we've lost, but to celebrate and remember the strength and the beauty that they shared with us, however they did. And it's important to recognize our ancestors as well. So when we talk about what I'm going to be sharing tonight, it's kind of interested what they wanted me to talk about. So they encouraged me, everybody at the community house encouraged me to share some personal things. So I will. So for my life, I was born in Niagara Falls, New York, obviously not in the falls, not in the water, but on the left side of the picture, there's a tall building there. You can see near there is the Niagara Falls Memorial Hospital. That's where I was born many years ago. And I just love this picture. I've always been, that's where I was born. And so it's always been a big part of who I am and how I identify. For the 6 years of my life, I lived at the Tuscarora Nation Territory, which is about 12 miles outside of Niagara Falls. So there's where Niagara Falls is, and the Tuscarora Nation is just up the road a little bit. I lived there until I was about 6 years old. And just to show you how young I was at one point, this is me. I think I was in kindergarten. So I just wanted to share this picture because when I was growing up, I was 6 until we moved away, and I'll get to that part. And I remember some things about I remember being stung by a wasp on my neck. I remember getting a snowball down my shirt, down my neck, on my back and everything, freezing there. My dad was actually the Baptist minister at the Tuscarora Nation. And that was a whole other dynamic that I might get into in a while. But I remember, as a lot of kids playing, how the little kids are curious and playing doctor and stuff, or, I'll show you mine if you show me yours kind of stuff. I got caught doing that one time. And the way I perceived what I was told that's not appropriate to do in public, but it was kind of threw some elements of shame to that. And I think that's one thing we could do better is how do we help our young people realize, little kids, little babies, that's where the expression if somebody is anal retentive, that goes back to their childhood and they're actually being into the crib. So the reason I talk about that is how we can, to encourage us to think about how we can support our children to accept who they are and not shame any kind of feelings or exploration. But yeah, I just, this is my kindergarten picture. But when I was 6 years old, my family, of course, I didn't have anything to do with it. We moved out to Southern California. So where I grew up from 6 until about age 27 or so was in Pomona, California. And as you can see, Pomona is about 30 miles east of Los Angeles. So I was like 3,500 miles away from our ancestral homelands. And Pomona, it's a kind of an interesting community. We were the only Native family in the neighborhood or all of Pomona, at least as far as we knew. In the neighborhood I grew up, there were a lot of Black and African American folks. Probably about 85% Black was where I grew up. About 10 to 12% Mexican, and a few Asian and Pacific Islanders there, and a few white folks as well. But it was mostly a community of color. In the neighborhood I was, Pomona, it's not all that like that all the way through Pomona. We did have some Native family and friends who were from New York, who were Seneca or Mohawk or other nations, but they lived 60, 70 miles away. One family lived out in Malibu, another family lived out in Long Beach and other places. So anytime we wanted a connection back home, at least, I mean, we didn't have to travel 3,500 miles, but we had to travel, you know, it was a whole day trip. And we had good friends. I mean, they had kids my age and my brothers and sisters' age. So we, you know, we got along with them and we played with them a lot, but I didn't get to see them. So for a lot of ways in Pomona, I felt very isolated because I didn't know, I was, you know, 3,000 miles away from our longhouses and our culture. Never got to play lacrosse as a boy, as my brother did. And being 6, I didn't really have too much of a transition going out there or problems. My older brother and sister had a little bit more, but I'll focus on what I went through because my difficulties came a little bit later when I tried to go back home. I was always proud to be Native, and I knew who I was. I know I was Cayuga, but again, it was like 3,500 miles away. So I always wanted to move back because I had missed my cousins. I'd missed the few years that I spent there, but I didn't have anything to do with that. When I was in 7th grade, my family was supposed to move back, and I was really looking forward to that. I told all my friends, you know, we'll see you later, and we're out of here, and we're leaving. And then my parents said, nope, we're going to stay. So that was another disappointment. And that kind of created a resentment because I always wanted to be back home, and I felt very much different being out there. And I'll come back to that thought, you know, a little bit later as well. But the one thing that I realized too in Pomona, Pomona is, like I say, a very diverse community. But as I was growing up, I started playing tennis, and I was a good student and everything, got good grades and everything. So when I got to be in 9th grade, I'm not sure if my parents or if I was one, it was kind of a combination of both, that they wanted me to, instead of going to Pomona High School where I should have gone, they sent me, or I was sent to Claremont High School, which is about 3.5, 4 miles away. So Claremont is a fairly affluent community, very European American. A lot of, I felt very disenfranchised and disconnected there. I had some good friends there, a few good friends, but a lot of their parents, their summer vacations were on safari in Africa or taking a journey across Asia or in Europe for the whole summer. So they were at a much higher economic level than I was. And even though I had a couple of really good friends there, I didn't feel really too connected there. But it was a good school, and I got to play tennis there. So as I kind of realized, this is a picture of mine on the left there when I was, I think, about 12 years old. I had played football and baseball and basketball, but and everybody was doing that. But I was attracted to tennis because it seemed like not a lot of people were doing that. And that's one thing I always kind of was thinking different or thinking outside of the box kind of thing and not going along with the crowd. So I started playing tennis. I really got to love tennis a lot. I kind of toyed around with the idea of trying to be the first Native American tennis player to be in the US Open or in Wimbledon. I never got that far, but I did pretty good in high school, playing in our league championships and things like that. But I also was introduced, being out in Southern California, to classical music. So here's a picture. I think I was in 10th grade here, and this is about the only time that's as long as the hair I've ever had. But I started playing violin, and I enjoyed it. I still enjoy classical music now, and I know a lot of people like classical music and all kinds of music. But it was like I say, I grew up in mainstream. You know, I kind of consider I grew up in mainstream American culture and society. So there are a lot of things I was exposed to, very little about my own traditional culture or what it means to be a Cayuga or a Haudenosaunee, or all the things that I've learned since coming back. But I started also, when I was out there, I started, before my senior year in high school, my parents got me a bus trip. They called it Ameripass. So you could go anywhere on Greyhound. So for 30 days. So I put 10,000 miles on the Greyhound by myself. And I visited all over Vancouver, Winnipeg, Chicago, came back here to Buffalo to visit my grandmother, Boston. And my first exposure to New York City, other than being in what I saw on TV, was on the Greyhound coming from Boston, coming into Port Authority. And I'd seen pictures of Harlem on TV, but I was really very much shocked by seeing how Harlem, and this is back in 1973, how Harlem was at that point. The poverty, the people, sitting on the streets, and just everything going on, because the bus went right through Harlem at that time. When I got into the Port Authority, I thought, I'm courageous. I'm a young guy. I was going to go visit I was going to go down on the subway and take a trip on the subway. I had no idea where I was going to go or where I was going to end up. And I don't know if I went to the wrong place, but I went downstairs. It was really, really dark and I couldn't see anybody. But I heard somebody ask in a not very good way if I had any money. I got scared pretty quick. And so I got out of there and got on the next bus and I continued on my journey. But on that journey, one of the places I went to go is I went to Boulder, Colorado, because part of the journey that I was on is like to find out what college I was going to go to. So when I got to Boulder, coming up from Denver, that one crest, if any of you are familiar with Colorado and going from Denver to Boulder, when the bus comes over across the road there and you see the whole Boulder Valley, right away I thought, I'm going to go there. So I spent 3 years at University of Colorado at CU. I did want to get out of state because I wanted to see how I was going to change and new experiences. So when I was at Colorado, again, being 1,000 miles away from home and 2,500 miles from New York, this is one of the first areas where I decided to kind of like come out and to live a life more openly as who I am. I remember there's a gay student association or a club there at the university. They had coffee houses, and I remember how many times I walked around. Sometimes I'd go and wouldn't go in, but one time I went in about 7 or 8 times. I walked around the building, and finally I decided to go in. And that's how much caution I had. Am I really able to do that? And that transitioned to kind of quickly about we'd go to classes, different sociology classes, to talk about gay, lesbian experiences and everything. We did a lot of things there. So I was a little more courageous at that time. But then after 3 years, I really didn't find my way in terms of what I was going to study. So I ended up moving back to California. And I'm glad I did. But when I got back to California, I spent about 4 or 5 months driving a taxi cab. But then my father, who was a carpenter, got me into the construction and the carpentry apprenticeship program. So I did construction for about 15 years and loved it. I really liked being around, there were obviously a lot of men around, a few women, but I really liked the physical nature of construction. I liked all the things that we did. I didn't like the injuries that a couple of times I could have had, but had a really good time there. And at that time, when I was out in California, my brother kept giving me a lacrosse stick. And so finally, I started playing lacrosse. Oh, the one thing before playing lacrosse, we also went to a lot of powwows out there. because that was our family's connection to being native. So we went to Orange County powwow, to LA County powwow, to all these different powwows throughout. And at one point I started dancing in traditional Haudenosaunee or Cayuga regalia. So this is a picture of me, I think I was about 24 at this point. And I did a giveaway, as is the custom there when someone is comes out in a powwow setting. So I did the giveaway. I really enjoyed it. I had so many friendships there at the powwows and everything. It's really some of the best years out there. But again, it wasn't Haudenosaunee, but it was native. So I was exposed to all different ideas and cultures of native folks, not my own. So I also, being in California, and being who I was, I also recognized that Hollywood, California, which is obviously a huge mecca for many people might know, is a kind of a big mecca for people who are lesbian, gay, transgender to migrate to, kind of like New York City, very similar, because sometimes when you're not accepted from your home community, you migrate and go to places where you are. So Pomona is maybe 30 miles drive from Hollywood. So I spent a lot of time out in Hollywood and just had a lot of my young adult years doing construction, playing lacrosse. I started eventually playing field lacrosse, but also going out into Hollywood and enjoying that, the nightlife there and everything. And that's when I started playing lacrosse. I said a couple minutes ago, my brother would give me a lacrosse stick every couple of years, and I never picked it up. I never was interested in it. I loved lacrosse. It was really meaningful because that meant back home. But finally, at one point, I started playing. So in 1984, the Iroquois Nationals were formed. 83, they were formed. But in 84, I tried out for the Iroquois Nationals. So that's me, as number 24. And I played with the Iroquois Nationals for a couple of years. And it was really a great opportunity because after my mom passed in 83, one quick note about my mother, I had asked her, why did we come out to California? I knew she had gone to Thomas Indian School, a boarding school where a lot of folks in New York went to, but I never found out why. And one of the reasons that one of the things that she was told at the boarding school is that her family would have a better economic and educational outlook on life if she moves away from the reservation or from the nation territory and join mainstream America. So instead of going to Buffalo and staying in Buffalo, we kept going 3,500 miles away. So that's the main reason why I grew up in California. But once she told me that, I understood that, well, I'll come back to that, but what she said is that if I ever do move back home, that I'll be able to take my experiences out in California and help benefit and support our own people if I ever do go back home. So in 84, I did. I moved back to New York and I made the Iroquois Nationals. And after my mother passed, I inherited this little small pickup truck with a camper. It's a small Toyota pickup, like a little two-seater, no back seat or anything, but it had this big camper on the back. And I lived in that for about 2 years. And even though lacrosse gave me connections with a lot of the guys and people throughout all the Haudenosaunee territories, I've also felt very isolated because I really didn't know any of my cousins. I knew a couple of them, but I didn't grow up with them, so they didn't really know me. And also being who I was, being a two-spirit person, I was very guarded about where I could be myself with. And one of the periods of difficulties that I had is when I went with the Iroquois Nationals to England in 1985 as a player. Great time, really great experience. We did a tour of England playing lacrosse for about 8 days. But when we came back on the flight, we came back into Toronto, and a small group of the players had their family and friends meet them at the Toronto airport, and it was hugs and kisses, and their wives or girlfriends or their kids or parents, they were all there to greet them. When the van we were on traveled back through Hamilton, Ontario, same thing. More people greeted them. along the way, more and more people greeted them. And when we got to Tuscarora, where everybody met from who was on this side of this side of the ditch or the U.S. Border, all the other folks had their family members come and greet them. And, you know, we miss you, we love you. And their kids or little brothers, siblings came to greet them, the parents or whoever that was. And there I was. Nobody was there to greet me because, again, I didn't really know anybody. I knew people through lacrosse, but I never really grew up with people. So that began a pretty hard journey for me. Even though, because when I moved back, I thought I would be welcomed by my own people because I thought, hey, I'm Cayuga. My mother was from Cattaraugus. My dad was from Six Nations. But that wasn't how it is. Because in Southern California, in American society, you know, I was pretty much, in some degrees, assimilated into that culture, i.e. playing lacrosse or playing tennis and playing the violin. And in American culture, when you're taught, if you want to meet somebody, you go up to them, you put your hand out, you be assertive and respectful, you have good eye contact and introduce yourself, and then they introduce themselves, and then that's how you get to know people. But I found out very quickly that isn't how it happened, how it happens in many of our own communities. And when I moved back, I stayed 3 months at Cattaraugus territories, and I saw that over and over again, where for some people it took me 10 times as they saw me, before they would even acknowledge or nod in my direction. And some people would take 10 or 15 times before they even said hello. And I was really confused and hurt by that, but I didn't understand what the culture is back home, because again, I really didn't live there, you know, except the first 6 years of my life. So it was a pretty big culture shock that I went through coming back home. Once I did come back home, I got into lacrosse more. I really I loved the game. I played a couple more years, but I got into refereeing box lacrosse. I started refereeing field lacrosse out in California. So there's a picture of me refereeing a men's Ontario Lacrosse Association Senior B game, and I just loved it. I refereed lacrosse for 30 years and just had some great memories. But again, knowing who I was, lacrosse and construction, very masculine, very cisgendered kind of focus, and very, in many ways, very homophobic. So I never felt comfortable to be myself unless I got away from those environments and went on my own and to find out where I would or could be accepted. So it was a lot of challenges that I had going forward. And then for a while, I couldn't find work, but I ended up applying for University of Buffalo, and I got accepted. And I majored in American Studies, but concentrated in Native American Studies. So the people who were there, Orrin, John Mohawk, Agnes Williams, Barry White, all these folks were tremendous, and some have passed away. A couple of them have passed away now. Well, a few of them, Fleta, Barry, John, and Yvonne have passed since then. But this is where UB had one of the strongest Native faculty members or faculty there. So I had some great teachers. There's where I started learning about our culture. This is one diagram that tries to represent the inclusiveness, the interconnection, and holistic nature of our cultures. And we could talk a lot about all these different circles, but just the idea that all of our cultures are very interconnected. I learned about that. I learned about our medicine wheel teachings, about the 4 races of human beings, and when people come together, as many people have multiracial or biracial heritage, and everybody's to be respected, but also recognizing not only our physical health, but our mental, emotional, spiritual health. So all those teachings came to me then. But I also learned, being in Native American Studies, I learned about all these different factors of doctrine of discovery, residential boarding schools, the stereotypes of from Bugs Bunny cartoons and the old John Wayne and cowboy and Indian Western movies that I grew up with. I learned about all these federal policies. And I also took a couple classes, one in geology and one in economics. The geology class was really interesting. I liked it. But throughout my life, whenever I'd go to Niagara Falls, I would sit by the water and meditate to absorb the spirit and reconnect with myself. But after I took that geology class, the next time I went up to Niagara Falls, I've caught myself, because after about 20 minutes of sitting there, and I realized I wasn't absorbing the spirit, I wasn't meditating, I wasn't restoring myself in that way, but rather I was looking at this rock in the middle of the water and kind of dissecting it and looking at all the striations in the rock, and that enjoyment that I had of renewing my spirit sitting by the water at Niagara Falls was taken away from me from geology course, one course that I took. So it made me realize that how much education can change people's values, or at least change mine. So, and all these other factors I learned about in a mental status, like in an intellectual learning, because there's readings and assignments and papers and things like that. And I learned that on that mental level. But then in 1992, I started working at NACS. I was able to join the youth development program, where we worked with kids from ages 5 to 20. When I first started, and the larger font is where I spent most of my time, but I also spent time in the elders, community cultural services, and Medicaid service coordination programs. But the majority of my time in the youth program, we were kind of seen as, oh, we play games with the kids. And it seemed like it was a recreational program. But we knew a lot of the youth had some major issues going on. One quick story is that we picked up one youth from a foster care home, and we didn't know anything about foster care or anything like that. We picked up this young guy, and he was about 8 years old. On the van ride, somebody stole a hat from him, and it caused a great big fight to him. And he fought and everything. We got everything settled. We almost took him back to the home, but we decided, no, let's go into the program. We got everything settled and got in. That evening, we had planned to have somebody come in to talk about the impact of alcohol abuse on Native families and family systems. Halfway through this presentation, this young guy jumped up, bolted out the room, and ran out. And of course, we're responsible for all the kids there. So I ran out to find it, to chase him. I physically had to pick him up because he was trying to throw himself in front of traffic on Grant Street, where NACS was at that time. And I had to bring him back to the building. And I remember he was trying to bite me and trying to kick and get away. So we got it back into the program, resolved everything, took him home. And the next day we told his caseworker what happened. Come to find out, the foster care home we picked him up from, was not only just a foster care home, but it was a therapeutic foster care home, which means he has a lot more issues going on. Just being in foster care is an issue itself, but therapeutic adds another layer of trauma to it. And the hat that somebody stole was a gift from his mother, who he saw earlier in the day. And he hadn't seen his mother in about 5 years because she was incarcerated through her drug use and the criminality that she got involved with. So when she gets, there's the first present that he got from his mom in 5 years, and then somebody grabs it. Of course, that's going to create a big ruckus and a big fight and a reaction from him. So that's when we started realizing we need trainings on what's going on with many of our youth and how serious these issues are. And the way I kind of think about it is what I learned at UB about the doctrine of discovery and residential boarding schools, that was on that intellectual level. But my experience working at NACS for the community for almost 28 years now taught me how all these things manifested themselves in the hearts and the lives and the actuality of our families. So it brought my learning from that intellectual mental to a heart and a gut level. So I was really grateful from that, and some of the best teachers I've had were those young people and the families who I worked at that time. A lot of the families who I worked within and sometimes still see are dealing with a lot of these different issues, and many times they're dealing with several of these issues. Some of the youth had all these issues are very prevalent in many of our communities. I'm not saying every family did, but a high percentage of the youth who were in our program had child abuse issues going on, diabetes, heart disease, violence, all these different things. So one thing that never, as I was growing, I never realized, how come we have this rich, beautiful culture, yet in so many ways our people are so unhealthy? So At one point, I was able to join the prevention planning group. And for those of you in New York City, you might recognize the two people here. On the left is Teresita Rodriguez, and on the right is Suki Ports. Both Teresita, Suki, all of us were part of the prevention planning group. Really great friends, good allies, and have a lot of great memories with them. But the prevention planning group developed this model. Oh, and I spent a lot of time in New York. The picture on the left is obviously ground zero as they started rebuilding. And the picture on the right, you probably recognize as Times Square. But what the prevention planning group developed is a sociocultural model of recognizing historical underpinnings, external factors, and cultural norms need to be understood to be supportive of diverse communities. And these issues got to be interpreted by members of the community. I'm just checking my time, and I need to speed up a little bit. So I'm going to skip through the best I can. A lot of people are talking about trauma-informed care, which is good. Not what's wrong, but what happened to a person. But one thing I've always felt is missing is understanding historical trauma. So real quickly, a definition is if populations were subjected to long-term mass trauma, they can exhibit higher prevalence of disease. But if we understand that, then it might provide for new directions. Thank you very much for that acknowledgement. I appreciate that. So this definition, I really like that. And because if we understand how these things of history impact our communities and our people and I would say all of us as Native people, we can overcome these issues. So that's what I'm getting into. And one of the things that I've done throughout my tenure and my work at NACS is I've acquired a lot of different documentaries because I can talk about things that have happened in history, and I can cite the references that I learned them from and everything. But I've been acquiring all these different documentaries, and we show them from time to time, either with our community members, because a lot of times our community members don't understand how what these things are, or how they manifest themselves in our community today, and have never really thought about that. So the Doctrine of Discovery up in the upper left talks about back in 1453, where Roman Catholic Pope issued papal bulls that said only European Catholic Christian people are human beings. Everybody else throughout the world is somehow less than human, subhuman, an enemy of Christ. And some people even took it further to say they're beasts. So people use that idea to justify the slave trade and the atrocities in Africa, all the things that they did to indigenous people here in the Americas, also Australia. And they're still using that doctrine of discovery practice from the 15th century to still take native lands away from native people. The Unseen Tears documentary and the Lower Post documentaries are on residential boarding schools. And we've done a lot of work on that. Many people have also done that. The whole idea of killing the man and saving killing the Indian and saving the man is one layer of the trauma. But if we look at all the physical abuse, emotional, mental, spiritual abuse, and all the sexual abuse of what happened to these children who went through the boarding schools. And by the way, it wasn't just one or two boarding schools. There were 365 boarding schools across the United States, and a similar amount in Canada. And they're still doing research to find out where they were in Canada. So the boarding schools were a really huge factor on Native people. And again, thank you for acknowledging that I don't have to speed up because I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. But as it relates to two-spirit persons as well, we know in boarding schools, if kids were traumatized sexually, and I personally heard some elders tell some of the most horrible stories of trauma that they endured going through residential boarding schools. And it's difficult even to think about the stories I've heard personally of elders sharing what happened to them. And just one quickly, I heard an elder talk about when he was 5 years old, being raped by 8 grown men in the boarding school he was at. And when you do that to a child, obviously that's going to disrupt their whole being, their whole life. He spent a lot of time in heavy addictions, incarceration, homelessness, and poverty, but somebody saw that spirit inside of him and gave him that respect that I was talking about at the beginning. And now this guy, this elder, is having this tremendous program in his community called Braiding the Sweetgrass that is restoring his community and his people to a better sense of health and well-being. So by learning what happened to our people, to our ancestors, and sometimes to my own parents, to our own parents. Like I said, my mother went to Thomas Indian School. So that had a big impact on me and my family. The Blood Memory film is all about the adoption era that happened in the 1950s and into the 60s, that they really talked about trying to get American Caucasian families to adopt Native children away from our own communities, to have them grow up in American culture as Caucasians. Lake of Betrayal talks about the Kinswood Dam that happened to the Seneca Nation people and took about a third of their territory. But those things actually happened to Tuscarora, to Tennessee Valley. Anytime you hear of a power plant being built to build a dam or a reservoir or a power plant, most of the times, 95%, 98% of the time, it was always Native people who had to move and to have their cemeteries moved away or died along the way doing that. So Lake Mead outside of Nevada, outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, all the plants in Washington along the Snake River, all those things, that was all Native land that got flooded. The Dawes Commission was about the Allotment Act and how that created a lot of homelessness, poverty, and contributed to a lot of alcoholism. And the More Than Word movie talks about the Washington pro football team. And now finally that they're changing their name, but the reason they're changing their name wasn't because they had an epiphany to say this is a bad thing or we need to change it. It was because of FedEx threatened to withhold their sponsorship. So yes, I'm glad they did, but still that movie talks about the power of stereotypes. And then the Awake movie talks about the water protectors and how they were treated by the military, police, and the law enforcement and National Guard at Sandy Rock, having to endure those rubber bullets, tear gas, barbed wire, tanks, and having all those military people come to them in full riot gear, whereas all the water protectors were unarmed. So when we look at all these historical traumas, they aren't just in history, many of them are still continuing that we still have to deal with. It's no wonder where we have all those different health issues going on. So one of the things that I really feel especially lucky on, as well as learning about the trauma and seeing how it impacted our community, one of the first gatherings that I was able to go to in my stay at NACS was a gathering of Native Americans in 1997 that was done by the American Indian Community House. And that was one of the big parts where my healing journey started. I have so many teachings that I will always remember from that going to training. One of them, there was a Navajo elder who talked about his involvement with alcohol abuse and got into some involvements with domestic violence. And I don't know if anybody was there who's on the call today, but what this elder did is that he stood up in front of the room as he was telling his story, and in full tears, he apologized to every woman in the room for any time or any incident where a man raised his hand in a bad way against a woman. And it was a blanket apology. He couldn't apologize for people who perpetrated those on any of the women who were there. But for him to make that acknowledgement and that courage to bring that awareness that we can forgive, we can apologize, we can mend our ways, that was so powerful. I've actually repeated that, and I've shared that same apology with other gatherings that I've been a part of. I was also able to meet a good friend who I still contact, Jennifer Cuffy Wilson from Shinnecock Nation. And about 5 or 8 years ago, I went to one meeting and I saw this woman come in, and right away, I know this woman, and that was Jennifer. a good friend. I love her dearly, and I just really admire all the work that she does. There were so many lessons from that Gona training that was really beautiful. Another important part was when a friend of mine, a coworker, and I came to New York to attend the gathering. And I was in pretty much early recovery. My friend, a colleague, a coworker, had more substantial time in recovery. And as the session ended for the day, we were walking down the street in Manhattan and come across this person, looked like a Native man sitting on the sidewalk, looked very unclean, very disheveled, looked like, and he smelled like he hadn't taken a bath for quite a while, looked homeless. And as we were coming up to him, I realized both during recovery, what he did is that he offered us a bottle in a brown bag. And I assumed it was alcohol. And realizing that me and my friend were both in recovery, they say if you're in recovery, if you want to stay dry, stay away from wet places and other things. So I was going to say hello and just acknowledge him and move on. But my friend sat and talked to him. We sat and talked to him for about 20 minutes. And yes, he was Native. Yes, he was homeless. Yes, he was poor. But what he was doing, I asked after he walked away, after that 25-minute conversation, 20 minutes with him, I asked my friend, why did you talk to him? You're in recovery, and he was offering you alcohol. He told me two things. First, he was offering the most valuable thing that he had in his possession at that time. And that comes from our culture. When we have guests, we offer what we can for them. And that gave me a whole different perspective of what that gentleman was doing. And then he also said he was also trying to make a connection because he saw two Native men come up and he wanted to feel like he had some connection with other Native people. And that was such a key teaching that when we met with him at the Gona training also, I remember this one young guy who came into the circle, and Native young guy, looked like he was shaking big time. Looked like he was on a binge, on a crack binge or something like that. He looked near death, to be honest. And all he wanted was two things. He wanted to ask if he could have something to eat. And of course, the people with the community house certainly greeted him and gave him something to eat, gave him some food to go with. And he just wanted to be accepted into the circle. And those experiences, when I was at the Gona training in New York at the American Indian Community House, were such a big impact for me. I was so grateful for that opportunity, and really my heartfelt thanks goes to the community house, the folks, Rosemary at that time, and all the folks who were there, Jennifer and all the other folks. And I've just been really lucky to attend all these other gatherings and retreats. The Northeast, which turned to be the East Coast Two-Spirit Society retreats. For 3 years that we had them out to Allegheny State Park. Those were as instrumental as all the other ones. So I could talk more about these, but I wanted to just highlight the Gona training at the community house back in '97. So what we're talking about and what we're trying to move towards, and what I'm trying to learn more and more, is the principle. We hear a lot of Haudenosaunee people talk about the idea of having a good mind. And this is what Rick Hill presented at a gathering of Good Minds a few years ago, and he allowed me to share this with other sessions like this. Having empathy with another person's situations, that young man who wanted to be accepted, that homeless person who just wanted to make that compassion, the compassion, to have that awareness of what other people are going through, to help alleviate it. And even though we couldn't fix that homeless person's problem or everything that was going on, at least we gave him a good connection for a good 20 minutes that he hopefully helped restore his feeling of being connected and as being a proud Native person. The disposition to do good. We're all in this world, like my grandmother told me, we need to respect everybody automatically. We can not like their behavior if they're hurting themselves or others, but we need to respect them. So that idea of doing good, because if we respect them when they're out there, they're going to remember that. And when they become ready to make a change, they're going to come to us and say, you respected me when I was out there. And because of that, I'm going to come and ask you for help. The idea of generosity. I think that's such a strength that our people have, that it could be, that person on the street, that was the most valuable thing that he had, but he offered it to us without any expectation of anything in return. Being grateful, being thankful for waking up each and every day, being modest and not arrogant or boastful. And that's why this opportunity, I've never shared as deeply as I've shared before with my story, and I'm so honored and humbled by that, your invitation to share this. Because when I think about my other friends who I dedicate and help keep me get out of my nervousness, I also realize if I can be that person that helps another person, and that's what we're all doing this for, all of us. We're all part of this conversation tonight to help ourselves and each other to restore ourselves to a good mind, to a better state of health and wellness. The humor, I was trying to tell more jokes, but I had a couple in mind, but that humor that we have is such a strength that we can have. But I also want to make sure that our humor is supporting and uplifting other people and not humor at their expense. Because oftentimes when we make fun of other people, it is making fun of other people. And it's nothing that both of us laugh at, but we need to have humor that uplifts everybody in a good way, that we're not teasing anybody in a negative way, but we're both laughing, we're both smiling at what that is. Kindness, love, and patience, all these different things. And I was so grateful that Rick shared these things at the gathering a few years ago, that I try to live by all these things going forward. Oftentimes I've worked with youth a lot, and we say that youth are our future, and they are. But a lot of times for Native people and Native teachings, some of the teachings I've heard is that children are gifts from our Creator. They're not our property. They choose us. They bring lessons that we're supposed to learn. And sometimes, and every person who's born has a special blend of talents, abilities, and skills that nobody else has. And every person has a reason for being. And when it comes to Two-Spirit people, we've had a lot of events at NACS, and somebody has usually asked about, what about lesbian, gay people, transgender, and Two-Spirit person? Pretty much every elder who's spoken at NACS says, we're not here to judge anyone. What helps is to look at how people focus and how they live their lives if they're a good person. If they're hurting other people, then you can stay away from them while still respecting them. But if they're helping people and having a good person, having that good mind, then that's a good thing. That's what we want to see with people. And what people do behind closed doors and whom they're attracted to is their business and not anybody else's. So that whole idea that each one of us has a place in this world, has a reason for being, that also comes from our culture. And these teachings help me along the way, help restore and keep my mind going. We talk about the idea of 7 generations, and this is really important, that when we make a decision today, what's going to happen to our great, 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 great grandchildren. And those are really important issues. But we also can recognize going backwards, what happened to our ancestors, to our great, 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 great grandparents. Residential boarding schools were around for about 150 years. So that's almost 6 or 7 generations of people going through residential boarding schools. If we go back to 1492, now we're talking about 20 to 25 different generations of people who've been through trauma, our ancestors. So yeah, we may feel those impacts of trauma, but what's most important, I believe, is that to celebrate and recognize we all inherit the strength, their wisdom, their beauty, their culture, our languages, their perseverance, and their endurance, because they all brought us to this day right now that we're having in this very moment. So When we think about issues across the generations, the seventh generation, part of my personal life's work and my life's mission personally and my work is to promote that idea of healing for all of our people, for that seventh generation, but also for us, each and every one of us today, as well as our children, grandchildren, and 7 generations out. I really believe in this concept, and I really believe that we can be the generation that starts to recognize that trauma, identifies it, corrects it, processes it, and heals from it to renew that strength, that wisdom, the perseverance, the beauty, the cultures that we all carry in our hearts, in our spirit, in our minds, and in our souls as well. So just a few pictures to kind of wind up what I wanted to share with. I've really been lucky, like I say, to attend all these different gatherings and conferences. The one on the top left was in Phoenix. It was part of the, I believe, the Circles of Harmony HIV conference, and just to meet so many people. And one of the persons there on the top right in the turquoise, he was actually at the Pride March this past year. And then the bottom left, that was in Santa Fe. And it was so great because here in Buffalo, in Western New York, I've always advocated for Two-Spirit, for gay, lesbian, for HIV concerns that impacts everybody. And it was this is one of my early conferences to realize there are a lot of Native people advocating for all of our relations. One of my favorite elders is Tom Porter. I love this man. When I first heard him talk, he had this compassion and ability he could be talking to 5,000 people, but it seemed like he's only talking to you. And everything he was saying, his words, his warmth, his love, I wanted to run up to him and ask him if he would be my grandpa, because I didn't know either my grandfathers, but that's how much love he carries, that's how much, and even to this day, he's still doing the work. And we're so grateful that he's part of our community. If you ever get a chance to hear him, I just love this man. And many people who have heard him have the same opinion. Emmy Mitchell, I've met recently in the past. She came to the Gathering of Good Minds as well. And she also is very respectful, inclusive of everybody. And I see more and more of our traditional Native people having that connection that everybody has that purpose and accepting everybody. And that's what we need to restore. So I love Emmy and her work. She's just a really powerful medicine woman and just does tremendous work. A lot of respect. We have so many other people in our communities that are doing this work. I also want to recognize people from the community house. Kevin, and I was so sad to hear of Kevin's passing a while back. And then Ken's passing a few years ago. This was at the Gathering of Good Minds in 2015 when I was in Buffalo, and I was so honored to meet Kevin and to work with Ken. Ken worked at NACS when I first started, then he went to the community house. And then Jason Runyon in the middle also worked for the community house at that time. And we also have other elders who we honor and recognize, some who have passed. So this is the bottom picture is the Youth and Elder Gathering at Ganondagan. And another of my favorite elders is Warren Sky. He's the fourth one from the right with the red hat and the dark glasses. We have a few elders who have passed on from here, Dara Dowdy and a few others. But our elders are the ones who, and our traditional people, I believe, are the reason why we are still here. And I respect Christianity and everybody, all the different ideas of a higher power. But I've always been taught to support our traditional people, and I try to do that as best I can. I also want to, again, acknowledge and give thanks for the American Indian Community House. Last year, I was invited to attend the Two-Spirit and HIV conference. So meeting Tony, Sheldon, and Melissa, and being part of that group, seeing Sheldon's, oh man, these were really meaningful opportunities to see so many of our people in New York being respectful and inclusive of everybody and all of you. I have so much gratitude for the community house, not only stemming from '97, but to this day. And I just thank and love each and every one of you for doing the work that you're doing. This is a slide that I put into our cultural competency, and I've got a few more, just a couple more, few more slides. This is a slide that whenever I do a cultural competency training, I always talk about Native history, culture, and her story, our story as well. But I always include this slide because boarding schools, that impacted everybody. Doctrine discovery also impacted everybody. But I include special considerations for our people who've been in urban areas for many generations. Like I say, I grew up in Southern California, so I know very much what it feels like to be disconnected from home physically, if not culturally and spiritually. I've always been talked about and included. I never had to come out to my mom or my dad to say, Mom and Dad, I have something to tell you, I'm Cayuga. I never had to do that. But to come out to my parents and tell them who I am for who I am and not knowing what their reaction would be, my mom told me, oh, I already knew, you know, and my dad had a bit of a problem with it, but he ended up being cool with it and everything. But just that uncertainty of whether or not our parents are going to be involved. People need a recovery. That's that person, that homeless person, children of alcoholics. Those are some of the kids who I worked with, biracial, multiracial folks. All of us have that right to be proud of all of our ancestries. Victims of abuses, I don't know who's been through abuse, so I want to be very careful. If sometimes when we see somebody going through an emotional time, sometimes the tendency is to put our hand on their shoulder to comfort them, to let them know they're supported, to help them recognize they can get through. But not knowing who's been through abuse, that may actually be a trigger for somebody to relive a trauma that they might have experienced. Because a lot of times those childhood abuses start with an unknown or unwelcome touch. So for me to offer that touch or a hug to somebody, I need to ask for permission. I need to, if they say no, that's perfectly okay. I can respect that. I need to respect that. But if they say yes, then I can give them that hug or that handshake or whatever that is. So again, not knowing who's been through abuse, our foster care community members who've been through that system, to welcome them back. Last year I was in Tulalip, Washington for a conference on residential boarding schools. Powerful conference. I presented a couple of times in there, but in their closing ceremony, they honored elders, they honored all the survivors of the boarding schools, but they also invited anybody who went through the foster care system or who was adopted to join them in that circle. And they honored all of those children, because to welcome back our foster care and adopted children is another thing that we need to be aware of and mindful of to incorporate into our thinking. Because again, that whole system is traumatic in and of itself. And again, our survivors of boarding schools, when we see our elders, sometimes they have some difficulty or sometimes they're not as warm or loving. And we don't have to ask them necessarily about if they're anything experienced in boarding schools, but rather they gift us with their silence so we can accept them as they are, help them heal if the time comes right, but then we can learn about what happened in boarding schools so we can honor our elders who may or may not be able to talk about their experiences in boarding schools. And then finally, the Pride March. And again, another deep source of gratitude and love and appreciation. I had never gone to a Pride parade ever in my life. And for a long time, I kind of struggled about what is there to be proud of? Because again, what I do behind closed doors, whose business of that, what people do for sexuality and things like that, I never really understood. But what I realized and what I came to realize, it's a matter of becoming accepting of our own selves, to not listen to all the homophobic or the racist comments that we hear and we see all the time or many times, because in many mainstream gay and lesbian communities, there's a lot of racism against Native people, whether they're two-spirit, transgender, intersex, whoever we are, there's still a lot of racism there. So I had gone a couple times. One time when we went up to Toronto, it happened to be Pride. I didn't go to the parade or anything like that, but this is the first opportunity that I went to a Pride parade on purpose. And to march in this parade was such an honor. And I was crying at some points during this parade because I remember my friends who, again, nobody ever spoke on behalf of or advocated for. So I remember them and their spirits came to me, and it was such a beautiful, wonderful thing. And I'm so grateful for the community house for putting that conference on, for inviting me, and for tonight as well. I wanted to close with this poem. To me, the first I heard it was in a recovery meeting at Seven Clans at Tuscarora Nation. It says, "O great spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, and whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me. I am small and weak. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty and make my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hand respect the things you have made, and my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise so that I may understand the things you have taught my people. Let me learn the lessons you've hidden in every leaf and every rock. I seek strength, not to be greater than my brother or my sister, but to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me always ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so when life fades like the fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame." When I first heard that poem at one of my early recovery meetings, I think I just really broke down, because this is something I've been yearning for a lot of my young adult life. And as I have grown and learned and got all the support from all the people who I've encountered, it is a wonderful journey of this healing. And the healing doesn't have to wait until you go through all these addictions and heavy alcohol abuse, because at the same time I can talk about being thankful and being happy to be in recovery, I also want to acknowledge all those folks who didn't make it. Because for every one of us who got into recovery, there were probably 10, maybe 15 or 20 or more people who died from their addictions, who died from suicide or whatever else took them out, or are dealing with some really harsh circumstances that they're still enduring to this day. So again, this healing journey can start when we're young, when we're children. If we can treat each other as gifts from the Creator, no matter how old or young we are, that's what's going to help us restore ourselves and each other and our communities to that better sense of health and well-being. Somebody sent me this picture, and I just love showing this picture. It's 3 birds, and we know birds are messengers in a lot of ways for Haudenosaunee. That's a lot of the teachings. So as we think about what we go through in life, it's always important to recognize and remember we have a lot to be thankful for. Our Creator wants us to be healthy, happy, and well. And yeah, we have some sad times, but overall, life is really, really good. So I just wanted to say Nyawa and thank you for your understanding, your patience, your everything you're doing, and just listening to me kind of ramble on a little bit. So I know if Ahimsa or Ty or anybody, if you wanted to, I have time. I'm not going anywhere tonight or this evening. I know if anybody has any questions or anything like that, I'd be happy to help as best I can.
Fantastic. Well, Pete, so I guess we'll stop screen sharing if we'll go back to the main screen here. Just wanted to give you the warmest, most generous embrace possible for your truth your candor and honesty, and just sharing your entire self with everyone today. It's truly an honor to have that here in this space.
You know,
Yawangoa, like this was so beautiful. You took us on such a beautiful journey and shared from so many places within yourself and from so many ways in which you're beautifully constellated, you know, through birth and chosen families. And you've really honored so many people and brought them into the space tonight. And I know I've been hearing from other folk tonight about just how deeply moved they've been by your sharing. And you create a space in which, by you being brave to share in these ways, it creates a space in which we can be brave. And I know I'm not the only one who's teared up a few times tonight. I've gotten messages from other folks saying that they have as well. So thank you for this good medicine. It's especially needed at this time.
Mm-hmm. And I will say we're on the, live on Facebook as well as other social media channels. And just wanted to let you know, since you can't necessarily see everyone, but on Facebook, you're getting lots of love, lots of hearts out there, and little thumbs up, as well as people thanking you for mentioning and thanking their relatives along your journey and along your path. And so just to name a few on the socials there, we said, thank you for mentioning my sister Rosemary from Francis. Love and blessings to you, Pete, for these teachings. Love that you mentioned Mr. Tom Porter, always joyful laughs, as well as many others. So just wanted to let you know that's what's happening. We will take some moments, and if folks have questions or comments out there, please write those into the live chat in Facebook, and we'll monitor those and take those. If you have any questions for Pete, we'll get those out now. But for right now, we'll just, since we do have a few minutes left here, we actually have some questions we wanted to ask you directly, Pete, for just based on your amazing presence and presentation. So, Ahimsa.
Well, for all of you saying those good words to me, this is all of you, it's all of us. We're all on this journey together. And all I'm doing is carrying that forward that I received from each and every one of yous.
Aho.
I'd actually, before I ask anything, I'd actually like to see, was there any that we've had so far from Facebook coming on through? And or if we also know we have other people here with us tonight. For me, like hearing you reflect tonight in so many different ways, there's also these points of intersection you don't expect when you're hearing someone's story. Like I lived in Claremont, California when I was in my late teens. Originally went to Pomona College, and yeah, so I know those streets, and so it seems like from Tanis, no specific questions as of yet, just a lot of love, and yeah, like Tyler, there's a question. I'm still taking things in. Is there a question that you had for Pete? I know that we sent Pete a huge list of potential things that we were interested in. So I'm going to go find that email in a second. But yeah, is there things that resonate for you that you want to respond to?
Well, I actually had some questions too about just based on just your words. And I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit, we keep talking about what this means to listen and to sit and listen. And I love what you so beautifully said about elders and even sitting in silence sometimes and with people who are going through healing. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, why that's important part of the journey of healing is listening. And if there's a specific moment where you really felt that lesson in your life.
Yeah, one of the things, many of us have heard is that we have two ears and one mouth. So right there, I remember that we're supposed to listen twice as much as we speak, because so many times, especially in American culture, like I say, the socialization there is you have a voice, be assertive, be aggressive, and in economics, it encourages people to be aggressive in many ways. But that idea of learning, that the idea of learning to understand and trying to understand rather than trying to be understood is something that has helped me a lot. That silence that we can sit in, there is that gift of just being okay with ourselves and within our own space, within our own spirit. And that's something in my travels and times I spent a lot of time by myself. Not only that bus trip, but I hitchhiked across country probably a dozen times all by myself and just had some wonderful experiences. So I don't have to, to be okay by ourselves is good. But when it comes to using our voice, so many times in residential boarding schools, our elders and our parents and others were taught, don't use your language, don't speak. And then that gets into how sometimes our parents bring us up that if you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about. And those come from residential boarding schools. But the whole idea of why the Creator gave us all a voice is that when we use our voice, that's our healing. When we say what's in our heart, that's our healing, because that healing comes from so many different directions, and our elders and our young people and each other. Using that voice honors all of those people. So it's really important to say what's on our mind in a good, respectful way, so that people really understand and we can be understood. So, and that's one thing that I see a lot of people or different times where they're on a board or advisory or in a meeting or something like that, they don't want to speak up because either they're nervous or they just feel, what I have to say isn't that important. Pretty much 9 times out of 10, if not every time, if you have a thought, somebody else has that thought as well. And if you speak up, not only are you speaking up for yourself, they're going to be thankful for, thank you for saying that, because I was going to ask that, but I wasn't sure if I should. And again, it's speaking up in remembrance of all the people who weren't able to speak. And when we learn our languages, every word that we learn, even though we may not know too much of our languages, but even when we say Yahweh or Seg or things like that, every word we say is undoing some of the damage that happened to our ancestors who were beat for when they spoke. So every time we use our own language, it could be a couple words, it could be a lot more. That is undoing that and providing that healing for us and for future generations.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Miigwech, Yawako, Pete, for that. You have some folks requesting if you could be their dad, and they're 73 years old. So just wanted to let you know that your words are being received out there. Some folks also talking about the what you're sharing tonight, especially as it relates to touch, to some of these lessons in the LGBTQ plus TGNC Two-Spirit Indigiqueer community, about consenting and how important that is. But I think, it was just wanted to get a little bit more, if you could speak specifically. And I think we do have some questions there, Ahimsa, about being Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer. And so, Ahimsa, if you want to cultivate some of that.
Ty, the first thing you spoke about, you said 2 things. The first one was about, can you refresh my memory there? One was about the dad. I'll talk about that. But the first one you asked about, you just mentioned, you didn't ask, but it was a comment.
Oh yeah, it was a comment. Someone was talking about, asking for before being touched. The idea about consent.
Yeah, that is key. I was at an event where they brought elders who went through boarding schools, and Jane Middleton Maz did a ceremony to welcome them back. There were about 70, 80 people in the room. Everybody wanted to give them a hug or at least a handshake. But after that was done, all 4 of them recognize, and these are elders, many of whom I looked up to for a long time, who I learned from a lot. All of them said how difficult that was, because they all acknowledged that they were abused in the boarding schools and they didn't want to be touched. So that's an important part. And in terms of, I love that part about the dad idea. And but one of the things, I forget if it was Tom, I think it was Tom Porter who talked about recently, when we see people who are elders or we see people who are younger than us, we may not be related to them. They may be a different race, ethnicity, gender, whatever, however we want to identify ourselves and each other. All those people who are older are still our aunties and our uncles. And we need to give them that respect. We need to give them that love, that consideration. And when we see young people, we are, as for whatever age we are all their caregivers, their guardians, their protectors, maybe not biological sons and daughters and everything, and what we normally think of in terms of biological family, but we all have that responsibility of upholding, protecting, caring for, loving younger people, no matter how old or young we are. So the whole idea that, oh, you're not my dad, you're not my mom, we need to get out of that to recognize we can learn something from everybody. And as elders, somebody asked me how many kids I have, and I told them thousands, because every of the youth I worked with, I kind of kids, I'm not their biological dad, but I consider them as people. It's a sacred trust when we work with young people or adults and each other.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. There was a set of questions, and we sent you a whole bunch of different things, and you wove into so many beautiful things. So I'm going to combine a few things that maybe you could share about. One is,
Sure.
at the community house, we're a community house that's based in New York City, and we serve and have for over 51 years now, people from the New York City area, the greater tri-state area, as well as people moving back and forth between more rural, suburban, reservation, reserve territories, north and south of the US-Canadian border. We have people from across Turtle Island. And so one of the things that we're always thinking about and increasingly want to think about is, we'd love to hear your thoughts, is particularly in terms of Two-Spirit Haudenosaunee folk and Two-Spirits living in the Northeast in general, but also you could think about this in terms of Native people in general, is how can those of us who are living in urban areas, those of us who are living on reserve, in traditional territory, living in suburbia, and also with the urban, it's not just New York City, there's so many urban places within New York State and, over across, within the colonial boundaries of, Ontario and, Quebec. And, so we have, we're a community that's been divided by that colonial border. And I was wondering, what are ways that you think we can lovingly support each other or gather, or what would you like to see, or would you have suggestions of things you've seen in the past that have really connected us wherever we're living, or, how there might be models for that for the future?
That's a great question, because I know a lot of those hurts are very real, and sometimes those hurts come from our own community members. A good friend of mine, when he would go to Longhouse ceremony, everybody knew he was gay, but when he went in, when he went in and sat down, people would actually get up and move away from him. And what does that do? What to him and his view of, ceremony and Longhouse and everything? So those hurts often come from our own people. So it helps to recognize that there's a reason why they feel that way, boarding schools, all these other things that we do. But the way to connect is that if all of us can be vocal and supportive and prominently, not we have to go, change the whole world or anything like that, but when we hear things that aren't quite right, that we need to speak up. That in the sports world, part of, for a lot of my young adult life, I was pretty closeted, doing construction and then getting into lacrosse. And I remember having to bury that part of who I am in those environments. But that also contributed to some of the substance use issues I unfortunately got involved with. But I was glad got through that and then got into recovery. But being upfront and honest, and I'm so glad, again, these virtual platforms, even the COVID pandemic has been extremely devastating for many of our communities. I heard a young elder, he's a young guy, he's about 24 years old, but he spoke with such an elder perspective. He talked about when he goes through challenges that he used to think, why is this happening to me? Why me? What's wrong? What did I do? Why me? But at one point he got to evolve to say, and to recognize these challenges aren't happening to him, but they're happening for him. So if we have that shift, then we can think about the pandemic. One of the things that's come out of the pandemic is that we are taking care of and being mindful of our elders more than ever before, because all of us are wearing those masks and all those things, and that's to protect our elders. And all of us by doing that, are saving people's lives as much as we can. We're spending more time with our families than ever before because the schools are shut down. And so many times when parents are working and kids go off to school, parents and children hardly spend any time together. And I remember doing one exercise that the parents didn't even know what favorite activity or color, who their kids' best friends were, because the parents were doing what they were doing, the kids are doing what they're doing, and they're so disconnected. Yet that was always a strength in our cultures. We're being reminded of how interconnected we are. Because even though we're going through this virtual world, I feel a very, very strong connection with all of you. And the tears that I was crying, and then I'll be crying tonight, those are all good tears, by the way. And that's what I was going to tell you that you mentioned earlier. When we do cry, and especially in this kind of environment, these tears are tears of healing. And those help get rid of all the toxins and the hurts that we have. So when we cry in these opportunities, that is healing. But even when we cry when we're sad or hurt, it's good to do that, because when we cry for people who we've lost, we are actually mourning their lives and everything that they did. And the thing that Tom talked about is we don't have to be afraid of when we all pass away, of death. It's a natural part. It's part of life. We get to go to Creator's world, or however we believe. It's that great mystery but we don't have to be afraid of it. And it's part of, one of my favorite sayings is that children and elders are held in high esteem and being sacred because they're both closer to the Creator. And if we think about stages of life, that made a lot of sense to me. But again, we know people leave us all throughout the lifespan. So part of that Thanksgiving address is never taking anybody for granted. So if you see somebody you love, you care for, oftentimes, yeah, we'll see you tonight or something like that, but we don't take that time to tell them how much we love each other, or how much we love our friends, or all those good messages. Because again, we never know, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. We only have today, and if we wake up tomorrow, we could be thankful for another day. Yes, one question I keep going on.
No, this
Beautiful.
is so great. Thank you. We definitely need this. And so just wanted to uplift, someone mentioned on the socials, your challenges that you've gone through, Pete, are helping everyone to learn and wanted to express gratitude for that. So I'm just responding to some reflections. You're really getting people to thinking out there. One question I did want to ask before we have to begin to wrap up our session here was specifically to the Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer youth who might be listening to this right now, who might be listening to this in the future as we reflect back on this times, and who might be out there seeking advice about helping to be who they are. And you have been such an inspiration to that. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about specifically to Two-Spirit and indigiqueer youth out there who are in community, both in rural areas or in urban communities, about any advice you have for them about moving through the world and being who they are.
Well, that's one reason why I'm so thankful for this session tonight. But I'm so thankful when I see young people coming up, because more and more young people are more accepting of everybody. More, there's less judgment. There's still judgment. There's still people putting others down for who they are. But I also think they haven't accepted themselves either, because there are some studies that say that people who bash queer, gay folks also have identity issues themselves. So it's not to overlook or forgive that or excuse that, but it's more about that understanding. But remember that each and every one of you, if we look ancestrally, all of us have and had a role with our communities. We were all accepted. I remember asking my grandmother if she knew of, and my dad too, if they knew of any gay or lesbian people. My gram said that she knew a man who lived as a woman. Did all the women wore women's clothes all the time. Everybody knew he was born a male, but everybody accepted this person as a woman for who she was. And there was never a question. We didn't, in our traditional cultures, we didn't have to label everybody. We didn't have to put everybody in a box. We didn't have to say, oh, you got to be this or that. It was more fluid of a sexuality, of orientation. So nowadays, yes, it's great to see more and more people generally. I think general society is being more open and accepting. But even if and that's one thing that's really important, because when we think about the challenges of telling our parents who we are, what's really important to recognize, and again, it doesn't excuse this or forgive this, but it brings that awareness to us so we can be better with who we are. But a lot of our parents were taught it's right or wrong, it's left or right, it's male or female, it's very binary, it's up or down, it's black or white. But we know life isn't just black and white. It isn't just one or the other. There's so many I know people say intersectionality, but to me, I think of it as a kaleidoscope of what life really is. Because I'm not just Kyuga, I'm not just a tennis player, I'm not just an athlete, whatever I am or whatever labels, we all have multiple layers of who we are. So for young people, for Two-Spirit, for queer youth, and even the word queer, my upbringing, that was not a good word. That was and one thing I was going to share, I remember in 1973, I was a junior in high school when the American Psychiatric Association removed the diagnosis of homosexuality as a mental health condition. That was in the big news. I was a junior in high school. And I remember how that impacted me. I never felt like a mental disorder. I never felt I was wrong or evil or anything like that. But it gave me a realization they really thought about me and others who are like me like that. So we want to be very mindful of where we're at, and not to suffocate who we are, but we want to be mindful of our surroundings. We can be vulnerable, we can speak up, we can say who we are, but just recognizing our own safety, our own protection. Sometimes I have a good friend who's always trying to convince his sisters to accept him. And this has been a lifelong journey. They may never accept him, so why try to force that on them where they may never. But again, it doesn't make it right. But just know that each and every one of you is a gift from our Creator. Each one of you has a purpose in life, has a reason for being, has special abilities, talents, and skills that nobody else has. That's why we're all unique. Creator made each and every one of us. So as we learn to accept ourselves and be in this world where we're accepted or not accepted or not sure, just never lose that confidence that Creator made me. The Creator made each and every one of you with that reason for being. Each one of you. The two most important days in our lives are the day that we're born, and the second day is the day we find out why. And that's what life is. That's what our journeys are. That's what becoming an elder. And becoming an elder isn't just an age thing. Like I say, I heard a 16-year-old elder give a beautiful talk. So it's that wisdom, it's that having that good mind of being thankful and all those things that we're talking about tonight. So remember, each one of you has a reason for being. That's why you're here. Never forget that. And I love each and every one of you. I really wish more people in my upbringing had been more vocal, because I didn't see that. I didn't have role models I never saw two men, especially two Native men, to be together. And that's part of the historical trauma piece. When I moved back to New York, I met a young Native guy about my age. I was really interested in him. You know, a good personality, funny, really sharp, and was interested in on that level. But he told me he would never be with another Native man because of the traumas, boarding schools. It was the Native men who pulled knives on him or tried to beat him up or beat him up. So as you go through life, it's also important to recognize there's expression, hurt people hurt people. So when people are coming at us as angry or not accepting, we need to protect ourselves. And again, it doesn't excuse that, but recognizing maybe they've been through a lot of historical trauma or traumas themselves that they've never processed. But again, each one of us, each one of you has a reason for being on this world. Creator brought you for a reason. Never forget that, and to learn to love yourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Like, I had reached out to Yagowihene via text just now, and I was like, I know we had a few more questions perhaps, and I was wondering like what was going to, she's like, ask them, we're recording this, ask them. So I'm just going to ask if that's okay, Pete, just one or two last things.
Sure.
And then, yeah, thank you for your kindness and your generosity. And I think it's sort of in tandem with what you were just sharing. So Ty had asked about, Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer youth. And similar, I'd like to hear you talk just a little bit more, perhaps about like Two-Spirit elderhood, like I think what's interesting, like I came up as a youth activist, since I was a teenager, and I remember definitely thinking about ageism and hearing of the term ageism being like so, when I was on a multi-generational panel one time with youth and elders, one time we were saying, what does it mean to be relegated to the future? Like one day you're going to do something great, but that's going to be 20 years from now. And then for elders, you did something great 20 years ago. And it's like the ageism on both ends of the spectrum. And then also ageism, period. I think particularly for Native women and for Native Two-Spirits, there's like a lot of ways in which all the oppressions impact us. So I was wondering if you could like maybe talk about, ways of resisting that colonial ageism, like how, like what are either models or insights or examples that you've seen of really beautiful ways of approaching the aging process? And also maybe like to think about like what are ways that we can center Two-Spirit elders more, and what might be some of the things that we should keep in mind to honor the full diversity of who our elders are, because we might not even know the fullness of those stories. Or unfortunately, so many elders, particularly in a lot of very conservative, colonial Christian dominated senior housing, oftentimes, people who have been out sometimes have to go back into the closet when they enter senior housing in a lot of places. So I think, I would love for you to just talk maybe a bit about, from a Haudenosaunee place or Two-Spirit specific place, or your own personal reflections on how do we work against that colonial ageism, and how do we think about like Two-Spirit elders in ways that center those elders and create more loving spaces?
That's these are great questions, and I love this dialogue. There's a lot in that question. So let me think about talk about a few responses. Um, one of the things I remember when I was at University of Buffalo in that strong Native American studies, when I was taking Seneca language, um, she was a faith keeper actually, and she told me to my face, to my face, that it is your duty as a Haudenosaunee man to have children. And she pointed her finger right at me. She got right. There's like 8 or 10 people in the room, but there was no doubt she was talking to me, at least in my mind, because she didn't look at anybody else. She didn't give anybody else the finger like that. So I don't know if she had heard things about me, or one of my friends said, well, her daughter liked me or something, or I don't know. But that's the message that a lot of people get. And I remember really squirming when I'm hearing that. I'm saying, well, I'd love to do my duty, but that's not going to happen, and how much that put me on another spin of that. So when we think about Two-Spirit elders, those are some of the messages that we got. My friend who when he went to the Longhouse, where we moved away from him, he's an elder. One of my friends who I remembered in the beginning, when he was growing up and all throughout his adult life, he had to physically fight almost every weekend, because he wouldn't back down. He wouldn't hide who he was because he's passed on now, but he had to defend himself. He got cut a couple of times in a fight. He got beat up more than a few times, but he had to fight each and every time. So it is a choice of whether to be open or go back in the closet, so to speak. But as more and more people are really understanding traditional culture, of those teachings that we're not supposed to judge anybody, those are where we can communicate to elders. I know a lot of elders who had 2 or 3 children. They did their duty. And then once they got to a certain age, they said, well, now I did my duty and now I'm going to live my life as I've always wanted to. They forced themselves in many respects to get married, to have those children, give all the love, do the best that they could with them, but it wasn't who they are. So that's another question, kind of not necessarily to talk to elders, or maybe, but what are the messages that those people who are in that situation, what would they tell their children? I love you, daughter or son or whoever you are, but I didn't mean to have you, or, there's so much of that homophobia that's within many parts of our community, not all communities, but we see more and more people really trying to restore what are our traditional teachings. So elders, sometimes, when we talk about hurt people, sometimes our elders are the most wounded and they don't want to share. Or I had another friend who's passed on that everybody knew who he was, and he could be with other guys, men on the reserve, but nobody gave him, during the daytime or when they weren't drinking, they would hardly acknowledge him. But when they're partying, yeah, sure, I'll do this or that. And so sometimes there's a lot of resentment from some elders who are Two-Spirit, and even the term Two-Spirit among Haudenosaunee, that's not a commonly recognized word. Most of the Haudenosaunee people who are lesbian, gay, transgender, and everybody, they may not identify as Two-Spirit, either a gay or lesbian, or whoever they are. For me, I prefer that term because, for one, in a lot of mainstream lesbian, gay communities, like I say, there's a lot of racism, but there's definitely a lot of ageism. I've rarely seen a lot of white gay men talk about their elders. Where we talk about Native Two-Spirit elders is here within our own communities. And that even though I'm very cis-oriented in terms of my identity and orientation, and even though I may not live as Two-Spirit in terms of an ancestral understanding, I am who I am. I I don't prefer to identify as gay, you know, even though before I didn't have a problem as much. But nowadays, knowing what's happening in mainstream communities, this is how I identify. So for a lot of our elders, it's helping recognizing, in a lot of ways, same with youth, just delayed a little bit to help them. How can we help people accept who they are, and to be open, and again, to be aware of our safety and things like that, but to be upfront and vocal with that acknowledgement, to understand all our relations means all of our relations, plus everything in the natural world too. So yeah, elders are, when I think back and some of the folks who I've known, there may be more secrecy, you know, and especially when they try to go back home, they don't know if they're going to be accepted or not. But this also comes from the boarding schools and a lot of the other issues that you know, the historical trauma pieces. But again, elders is just recognizing. We did a GONA training in Niagara Falls about 6 years ago, and we planned it ourselves. We followed their model, but incorporated a lot of our teachings. But what we did in the beginning of our icebreaker, you know how everybody's in a circle and you go meet the next person and that person, and you have this whole chain of everybody greeting each other. I asked everybody to tell each other as you greet somebody, just not say hello and hi, where are you from, all that, but tell each other you are a gift from the Creator. And ask both people to say that. And it was so very, very cool, because we also acknowledged maybe some of us weren't treated like that when we were little babies or kids. But it was so cool to see these 70-year-old women, 65-year-old men telling each other and giggling that each one of us is a gift from the Creator, and to restore that humanity, that beauty to each and every one of us. And for Two-Spirit elders and gay, lesbian, and transgender elders, it's as important to do that. Because again, maybe we didn't get that greeting. And it was so cool to see a 10-year-old person in that circle tell an 80-year-old, you are a gift from the Creator. So those are the things we can do. Some of the things, a lot more, but just that acceptance, just recognizing that people exist is another part.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Ty, was there anything that or were there any other remaining questions from folk? I know I still have a million more. So I'm like, let's go into queer lacrosse histories and like all these. One of the questions was like going to be like, so I'm going to actually say mine was like, what are all these other points in Haudenosaunee culture, history, politics that a Two-Spirit lens, if applied to it, would help reveal so many more stories, you know, such as the history of people of multiple genders, you know, playing lacrosse, you know, people, you know, who might have been closeted in lacrosse circles, people who were not, and that was accepted and beautiful. Like, I think even just that, like what it would mean to gather those stories. So, yeah.
At work, we did a virtual Pride event in June, and I gave an overview of Two-Spirit issues, kind of like from a cultural competency lens. And there were two people, Native people who were on the call. They weren't from Buffalo area. They were from nation territories throughout New York. And they talked about how lonely they felt, how isolated, unsure of their safety, and all the things we're talking about. So it was so good to have that conversation with them. And again, this conversation tonight, to have a Two-Spirit focus on part of what the community house is doing, or a big part of what the community house is doing. I have to get onto one of these bingos on these Friday nights. Hasn't worked out yet. Would have loved to hear Talia talk and do the calling out for that. I will, you know, hopefully I'll get on them real soon. But this has just been a tremendous, and it is, I mean, there's so much more. But I ask, you know, whether I can say wrong, whatever, but I ask each and every all of you, what can we all do? This isn't just me talking. This is, you know, all of us. How can we all find our ways to be supportive of everybody, ourselves included, however we identify? So again, it isn't just me. It's all of our elders. It's all the people who we've all lost. It's everybody who brought us to this day who we can be thankful for, and realizing we are paving the way for that seventh generation to come. And there's a lot of folks who could benefit by these ideas and perspectives.
Oh, Yawako, Pete, so much love, and love from the folks out there. Truly, it has been such a special time to be with you, and also thank you for continually to underscore, as we have these conversations, the ongoing conversation, the evolution of language, the evolution of history, and also to always be mindful about safety and how that important part of identifying as being two-spirit or indigiqueer or gay or lesbian is, and also breaking open what family means, and how within our own community as being two-spirit indigiqueer folks, the idea about chosen family, about having a multiplicity of children, and how other folks who don't identify with being two-spirit or indigiqueer could really assist in the vibrancy of the two-spirit indigiqueer contingency. So I just want to thank you for all of those words of wisdom, and especially your personal stories. So lots of love to you, and also lots of love from all the folks out there. You're getting lots of heart on the socials of people with tiny hearts and gracious hands for you joining us at the community house. As well as touching upon what people said too, with their own fathers or grandfathers and uncles and people, aunties having to hide who they are in service of culture, and the complexities of that conversation about being out or not, or being who you are or not. So a reminder for myself continually about the privileges, about what it is to sort of, be open individual in person too. So miigwech for that teaching.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this has been absolutely wonderful, Nyawangoa, and it creates space, and it reclaims space, and it creates time, and reclaims time. So this has been beautiful. Thank you so much, Nyawa.
This virtual platform is helping us reach out to more and more people. And for all of you, you're all connected. Don't think you're isolated no matter where you are. You're part of our family. You're part of my family now. And even though I don't see the names or everybody there, I give that love right back to each and every one of you. So, Nyawa for being here.
Big hearts, Pete.
Yep.
And thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, all the organizers to make this happen, both seen and not seen, both heard and not heard this evening. It takes a group of folks to make this happen. So major shout outs to all the emails and phone calls to make this happen tonight. Please join some of our two-spirit indigiqueer programming at the community house. We did have, it was basically a pride summer of bingo, and we're continuing on into the fall with other elders who will be interviewing, as well as dance parties and getting out the vote, and what that is in our community, conversations around that, as well as filling out your census form and making sure everybody does that, both indigiqueer, two-spirit, and beyond. Even if you're not that, to please fill out your census form. Very, very important. My name is Ty Defoe, Oneida Anishinaabe, and always remember to keep that sage burning against the machine. Ahimsa?
Now, this has been wonderful, and as Ty mentioned, we're going to be bringing some two-spirit bingo back, woven into some other things. So Yagawine was one of the ones who, in our little private Zoom chat with AICH folk, was dance party. So we are planning at some point in the coming weeks to a dance party. We'll probably have some bingo woven in for the, when we need to take a little dance break or something. And in addition to the work, again, they moved the census closure period, ending period, up a month. So you have until the end of September to get family, loved ones, communities. I understand all the critiques of the census. I know some tribal communities, and certain are not crazy about having certain counts, but also it is a way for, Indian country for Native people to be counted. And similarly, like while we respect the sovereign right of people to say, hey, I'm not going to vote in a particular election, we are going to be having some electoral voting kind of focus programming in the coming weeks as well for those who do want to vote and are able to vote, to mobilize that vote for this very important election in 2020. So we're going to be doing a bunch of things that are both Two-Spirit focused in terms of all of those things, having some additional Two-Spirit elders be part of the Sacred Spaces series. And so yeah, just if you haven't signed up for Community House email lists, or if you haven't joined or liked something on Facebook or other social media, keep posted, because there's good stuff afoot, good stuff coming, more good medicine. So, Yawa, any final words, Pete, before we close for the night? So I think, anything on your end, Ty? Pete?
I just had unmute. No, just keep it going. Pay it forward, everybody. We need all of yous, and know that you're all loved. Take care, everybody. Yeah.
Yawa.
Yawa.